So my name is Patricia Hart, and I am a Unitarian Universalist parish minister, more often than not doing interim work, as I am right now, in Charleston, West Virginia, where I've been for a year and a little, and I will be for a year and a little bit. The reason I'm here is because Andrea Lerner invited me. And the reason that Andrea Lerner invited me is that in addition to doing parish ministry, I have for the last 15 years in a concentrated way also been a stewardship consultant. I have been part of what some of you may know of as the Congregational Stewardship Services or Congregational Stewardship Network, the group of consultants that the UUA managed and sent out to congregations who had some big money question, usually having to do with a capital campaign, and sometimes having to do with annual stewardship. And the way I got into that is the way all of the consultants in that program got into it, and that is that I was a lay person in my congregation at a point where there was significant, that we had a big money challenge that we had no idea how to handle. We had a capital campaign in Yarmouth, Maine, which is where I was a member before I went to seminary. So, and what was true for those of us in Yarmouth is that we found ourselves with this enormous responsibility and no expertise we felt good about to handle it. There are some aspects of the money story, the funding story in our congregations that is outside the regular experience of that congregation. And I'm speaking carefully because our congregations almost always have some people in them who've done development work, who've done fundraising work in other settings, but there are some things that are particular to congregations. So I've been doing that for a long time. And what that means is that I'm got really good at capital campaigns, and I got really good at helping congregations figure out how to do their pledge drives better. And there are lots of ways of doing pledge drives better. But the realities that we are facing call for new kinds of expertise, I believe. The pledge drive model worked very well 50 years ago, worked pretty well 20 and 30 years ago. It is working increasingly less well for all of our congregations now for a variety of reasons. So I've become really interested in, so what do we do? Do we just get smaller and smaller and figure out how to economize and do a good job of dying? Or are there other alternatives? And so what I want to talk to you about today is some of those other alternatives, some of the reasons why the pledge drive model isn't working as well as it used to, and then the more interesting part, which is, how should we think about this and what might we do? It's important for me to, full disclosure here, to say what this workshop is not. This is not, and I hope you will not be too disappointed, we're not going to use our hour talking about managing pledge drives or increasing the average pledge, even though those are worthy goals and there are workshops about them. It is also not a workshop about balancing the budget. I have gotten rather preachy, not surprising since I'm a minister. I have become concerned that if you were from some very different place and you were plopped down in the middle of our congregations and listened, especially during pledge season, you might get the impression that our first principle is balancing the budget. That is the most important thing in our religious practice. And again, while it's important, and there are workshops about that, that's not what this is. So, displaying some of my biases. Quickly, I'm going to tell you about what this workshop is. Oh, and let me get through this early part, and then if you have questions and comments, I hope you will raise your hand. I will do what I can to make sure we get all the way through to the end, but this is your workshop, not just an opportunity to listen to me. Giving patterns are changing. How many of you heard Scott Taylor's keynote? Wonderful, inspiring, so most of you. I ran up to Scott Taylor after the keynote and said a number of things to him, including, I hope, how much I appreciated it, but I said, Scott, as you do this presentation, I want to ask you to be careful not to blame millennials for our problems. Giving patterns are changing because the culture is changing, because the World War II greatest generation is getting older, and in my experience, those people are actually, many of them, not any longer in a financial position to be the major givers of their congregation. Some of them still are, a lot of them aren't. Baby boomers, yeah, we're definitely part of the problem in our various ways, but much research has been done about the ways that younger generations give money. And while a lot can be said about this, and I'm going to be going into a little more detail later, the sort of summary statement is millennials, when asked how they give money and time, what they say is that they don't support institutions. They support causes. They will give money and time, maybe in a consistent way, often in a quick, one-at-a-time way, because they are certain, they're quite certain, that it's going to make a difference. If they make a contribution of time or money in this particular instance, it will make a difference in the world. The generational assumption is that institutions are not very effective. Institutions actually are a problem in many ways, and so the logic is, I'm not going to give my money to institutions, I will give it to some place that will make a difference. And one of the reasons why we need to re-envision stewardship in our congregations is that, consciously or unconsciously, what we ask people to do is give to the institution of their congregation. That doesn't work so well anymore. It's working less well. On the other hand, annual pledge drives. I used to be bold and say that annual pledge drives were going to go away, and maybe they will at some point, but I'm probably not going to live that long. You okay?
Yeah, you're out of chairs in the other room.
Oh, out of chairs in the other room. The need to provide a way for members, and sometimes friends, in our congregations to provide sustaining support to their congregations is still very important. It is still by far the largest revenue line on our budgets. It is something that annual pledge drives, especially when they're done well, provide. And the annualness of it is important too, because there's a point in the congregational calendar where this is the time, this is the season that we're going to talk about generosity. This is the time, I hope, where the treasurer and the finance committee look at the next year's budget through the lens of the mission of the congregation and try to present the budget in a way that explains how the money is supporting the congregation. We need that. But annual pledge drives are not now, have not been for a while, and will be less and less so in the future, a good way to collect money from everybody. They actually, because of the way we've set them up, I believe they are a disincentive to some of the members of our congregations. And I will give only one example of that. There's a young man in the Charleston congregation. He's not a member, he may never be, but he's very active and he's there almost all the time. Steve. And Steve is not a pledger, and people have invited him both to become a member and become a pledger, and certainly just to give money to support the congregation, which he is occasionally willing to do. But one day he asked a question. He said, how am I supposed to put any money in the offering plate when I never carry cash. He's 32 maybe. And he's very technologically sophisticated. It's his work. He said, I never carry cash and I don't pay anything with checks. And the money collecting mechanisms in this congregation, except for pledging, aren't actually adapted for people like me. And so I asked him something that had occurred to me recently. I said, if there were a QR code printed in the order of service or actually projected on the screen, would that make a difference? Do you all know what I mean by that?
No.
Those little things that look sort of like a UPC code, and you use your smartphone to connect to something else.
The squigglies all in
The squiggly square, indeed. So let me ask, how many of your congregations do have a QR code printed someplace that people can access on Sundays? Yes, good. It's a small but possibly very significant thing, not only because it might bring in more money, but because it says something to the people who are used to managing their financial lives and especially their giving lives that way. It says that the congregation is ready and willing and in fact happy to receive their contributions. So let me say, because there are whole workshops that can and are being done on the year-round stewardship, year-round pledging. It's called by different names. Something I'm very interested in. If you want to talk to me more about it, please do snag me. I believe, to be extreme perhaps, that for our congregations to keep systems that require the leadership or staff or a combination of the two to get everybody to pledge fresh every year must happen that way. Those systems must go away. Which is different from saying you need to talk to everybody about their pledge every year. I think you do. But we have created systems that require some mechanism of everybody to either fill out a form or go online and say yes. Somehow, something they have to do, even if it's just in a service on a Sunday morning. And if they don't, then our stewardship chairs and treasurers count them as zero. A zero pledger for the coming year, which requires, you all know this, I've done it too, a lot of time, a lot of footwork, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails or texting to try to say to somebody, you're not really not pledging this coming year, are you? And sometimes, in fact, they might be, but in many, many cases, it's a job that has little positive value. Let me just put it that way. And I know that we are always very careful to say that our congregations are not public radio and that we need to not, do telethons and endless thises and that's because our relationships with our congregations are different from our relationship with public radio, as they should be. Nevertheless, public radio and many colleges and universities and many other nonprofits have figured out that if you can create when they create a sustainer pledge level so that there's an automaticness to somebody's gift, it not only makes it simpler for the giver, it creates lots of opportunity for the institution to talk to people about the important stuff. The important stuff is not whether they're pledging $1,200 or $1,300 for next year, ought not to be. It's how are you doing in this community? Are you feeling like this is your home? Is there something that you really love to do that nobody's asked you to do yet? Those relationship questions, it actually creates more time if you, to some extent, standardize the process or at least simplify it, creates more time for important conversations to happen. And the way that I literally had one of those light bulb moments when I realized a number of years ago when people sign the membership books in our congregations, we don't ask them to put an ending date. We assume that they are members until they decide not to be, or until they move, or until they die. And yet we create this interesting dynamic we have by assuming that there is an ending date to their financial commitment that starts over at 0 and goes on from there. I realize these are heretical words, so I'm going to ask you to just sort of accept them so that we can go on from here, and you can harangue me later. I will welcome it, I promise. Another big reason I believe that we need to re-envision stewardship is because the reason, as we talk about giving and stewardship, the reason that we want people to give money is because we care a lot about the purpose and the missions of our congregations. And yet, procedurally and programmatically, we have separated those two things sometimes quite dramatically. And I, again, realized recently, we try to do justice work for free through volunteers or through special collections or something that's off budget. We have, not always, but in my view, far too often, disconnected the justice work that our congregations do from the budget. I think that in fact makes the stewardship message harder. You can fight with me on that one too. I deeply believe that this is not a small topic. This is actually a big topic, and one that is ripe for all kinds of creative, imaginative futures in our congregations. And anytime that's true, there are opportunities for new people who are not currently in leadership to get involved. And so imagining a different future is a good thing. Do me a favor, take a breath. We'll come back to some of that stuff. But I just want to capture something that we all know or should be clear about. Why do people give money to their congregation or anything? Why do people give money?
They feel a connection to it.
Absolutely, they feel a connection to the place, the organization that they're giving money to. Good. What else? Why do people give money?
Want it to continue to exist?
To make sure that this thing they feel connected to will continue to exist. Yeah, which kind of explains, if this is what you're thinking of too, why sometimes people who haven't actually set foot in the building for years continue to give a pledge, because they actually really care a lot about the existence of that congregation. Yeah.
I just want to answer that. I've kind of like taken a lot of these workshops, and they've said like it should be beyond just I want you to exist, beyond just I want you to be able to keep the lights on. It's kind of like I want you to be able to do stuff. I want you to be able to.
So there are lots of reasons, and not one of these reasons is a comprehensive one, but it's a real one. For some people, it's because they want that institution. I live in West Virginia, folks. Without public radio, I would have a harder time.
Yeah.
There we go. Why do people give money? What are some other reasons?
Commitment to the faith.
I'm sorry?
Commitment to the faith.
A commitment to the faith, to your own faith and the faith. Yes, good. Why else?
Support the religious education program.
So particular programs, because sometimes people give money to their congregation because they really passionately care about RE or social justice or music, any number of things. Yeah.
A sense of financial integrity.
A sense of financial integrity. Say something more about that.
So you recognize that there are services you're receiving and you want to do your fair share.
Okay, so the integrity, I understand that this thing that's so valuable to me is not free, and I have some responsibility to support it. Yeah.
It's making an additional commitment to that organization, and you can do it through money.
So, yes, thank you. So people make commitments to their congregations all kinds of different ways, by just showing up, by bringing their kids. I can't even imagine the number of hours of rehearsal those beautiful children must have put in, and it was their grown-ups who got them there. Or serving on the board, being treasurer or whatever. Financial commitment is another part of that. Yes?
Another form of feeling connected is people feel good about giving to something that they value.
People give because it makes them feel good. To do, to make something they value real and strong in the world. Absolutely. Absolutely. People have actually done, Unitarian Universalists and especially non-UUs have done a lot of work on this. Why people give. 3 sort of big level answers are: people give because we're grateful, to add meaning, maybe making it possible for the congregation to exist into the future, and to help to make a difference in the world. That's true. There's more, though. Those top reasons we give because we're grateful, to add meaning, to help. The research is very clear on this. People give consistently and generously. In other words, not just once and not just a small amount. Because they believe in the mission or the purpose of that entity. Also because they trust the leadership of that organization and are confident about its financial stability. And because they're thanked. Here's something that you all should know. Okay, here's my question I always give. Do you know what would happen if tomorrow, or any Sunday, in your congregation, there were to appear in the collection plate a check for $1,000 from someone who was unknown? Not a member, not a friend, not on the list, but a check with a name and address on it. What would happen besides depositing the check, which I hope you would certainly do? What would that trigger? What systems would get triggered?
Thank you.
A thank you from
The treasurer.
The church.
from the church. Yeah, but somebody would have to write it.
I write them all the time.
Julie writes them all the time. Thank you. I'm reading your name tag. And you do that because you're a wonderful person, I'm sure. But do you have an official role that would make you be the thank you note writer?
No, I'm just chair of the worship committee right now, and I'm a 5th generation universalist, so I've been with that a long time.
And people in your congregation know that you're the one who would write the thank you note. Okay.
The Board of Trustees writes the thank you note in my congregation.
In that case, in Shelter Rock, the Board of Trustees would, at the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
We write.
Good. All right. What would happen in your other congregations?
Membership team would probably reach out to that person if that's not known to us otherwise.
So the membership team would reach out to that person who, and we assume this is an unknown person. How would the membership committee find out who that person was and how to contact them?
Check.
But membership committees don't normally collect the checks.
From the treasurer.
The treasurer would give, probably, if things were working right. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about what would happen?
The office.
President or the minister would write a thank you note.
Okay, the president or the minister would write a thank you note, and they would find out because
$1,000 check would get somebody's attention.
Usually in our congregations, a $1,000 check does usually create some attention. I asked this question in another setting, and somebody started talking about how it would be important to ask the minister in case the person wanted to be, that information to be held in confidence. And I said, if somebody wants to remain anonymous, they are not going to write a check for $1,000. They're going to find another way to do that. But there is a sensitivity and a confusion, I think, in our congregations that comes with money because we value highly the confidentiality of the money that comes in. Usually, sometimes only one, but frequently only 2 people actually look at what comes in the plate, at least quickly. The treasurer might look at it later. And so in far too many instances, I believe, can't know this for sure, but in far too many instances, nothing would happen. Or wouldn't happen for a month or more. Or wouldn't happen until the next time the treasurer sent out the statements for contributions. And the reason this is relevant, I would like to think that this would happen if the check were for $100 or $50 or $200. One of the ways that people make themselves known in congregational systems is by giving some money. It may even be sort of the first thing that they do. And there's a lot of study which indicates that if somebody is considering a significant gift to any kind of an institution, they will give some money as an initial gift to see what happens. To see what happens. And our systems are not frequently not set up to be able to respond to those unanticipated, non-pledged gifts. So just an example. Because all of this is true, because giving patterns are changing, because giving is meaningful, and it has to do with somebody's connection, with their own integrity, with their religious faith, and with their congregation, how you ask makes a difference. This seems so obvious. Of course it makes a difference. But it's a more complicated question than it used to be when pretty much all of the potential contributors we had in our congregations were showing up on Sundays, were members, and either were pledgers or were going to be asked to be pledgers. When we knew that set of people, they were predictable. We knew their names, we knew their contact information, we knew their kids. We knew we were probably going to see them. The way we asked was simpler and could be done in sort of one way. Now, how many of you would say, let me ask the question a different way. On a typical, normal, not a special occasion, and not summer Sunday in your congregation, what percentage of the people who are there pretty much every week? Would you say? Regular?
10%.
Wow.
I think 90%.
90%.
Wow.
Dude.
I just did this math the other day. We're at around 60% for adults and about 70% for children and youth.
Which is fabulous and a little high. Average, if the averages are right. Yeah. Anybody else have any thought of?
Sort of what?
You're asking how many people are there every week?
Or almost every week.
The same group of people, or how many members are there each week?
No, the same people. Regular attendance. There's a couple in the Charleston congregation who are new. They started as visitors 5 months ago. They signed the book a couple of weeks ago. They have missed one Sunday. And I know it and they know it. That's unusual though. So what I'm asking is, of the people who are regular attenders, how many of them are attenders almost every week? 95. Wow. I mean, there may be radical diversity on this particular point in this set of congregations.
I mean, it might be outdated, but we say 50% of our people come 50% of the time.
50% of the people come 50% of the time. So basically, average attendance is twice a month.
Yeah.
For a lot of, and we don't have good data on this, but anecdotally, I've heard that a lot. Yeah?
I think what you were saying, I think that's true with my congregation too. You have very few people come every single week, but you will have people come twice a month.
Twice a month has become as close to normal as we've got.
Okay, then I would say it's 56%.
Okay. And let me ask another question. How many of you, on a typical Sunday, what percentage of the people sitting in the pews or the chairs are new? Meaning maybe it's their first time or they're still checking you out. 10%? 1%? 5%?
2%.
Maybe 20? I think there's real diversity on that. And those two things in combination are very interesting. The regular people are not regular every single week, and there are visitors every week. I sometimes look out at the congregation on a typical Sunday morning and realize that it could be as high as 30% of the people who are there are either completely new, are returning visitors, or are in that same category with my friend Steve, who just is allergic to membership. And the congregation, the regular folks that he's interacting with, are not the same every single Sunday. That's different than it was. It's very different than it was when I started attending a church when I had 3 little boys in the mid-'80s. Yes?
But the point is, you can't sort of look at the liturgical calendar and plan it out. We know that Christmas Eve and Easter, we get 90% of people we've never seen and will never see until the next Christmas and Easter, right? Coming of Age Sunday, we know all the families come. So we kind of know it.
You can know some things. Interestingly enough, those things we know are not always transferable to other congregations. In Charleston, for a variety of reasons, Easter and Christmas Eve have often been the very poorly attended Sundays. So yes, there's some things you can know. My point is not that we can't plan for it, but that what we're planning for looks different than it did when we knew all the people who were there. There are some things I have learned through doing this work, just 4 of them, and I feel strongly enough about them that I'm going to share them with you quickly before we go on. Giving is important for everybody. I believe that everybody cares about that decision that they make to give money. But not every giver pledges. And that's true for a variety of reasons, and I think a growing number of reasons. So again, it seems obvious, but the learning is to count all gifts and thank people in whatever way you need to do that. I am one of the first things, I'll get to you in just a second, one of the first things I look at when I look at budgets for congregations, I always look at the pledge revenue line. And then I look for the other gift line. Non-pledge gifts, miscellaneous gifts. I'm not talking about plate. I'm talking about the identified non-pledge gifts. And frequently, far more frequently than I wish was true anyway, it's not there. Some congregations even automatically assume that some new gift is a pledge in some form, and so they absorb it into that line, which means that the congregation doesn't have a good sense of whether the money, the non-pledge gifts, are important. What were you going to say?
I have a friend who hates giving birthday gifts because he feels obligated to, but he loves doing things spontaneously. And I'm sort of wondering if the pledge idea is falling into this obligatory idea. And maybe we need to be more spontaneous in offering opportunities to collect money from people.
Thank you for that. Again, this is not my original thought, but it is my observation. And one of the reasons I put this down is because this book by Kenan Callahan, Giving and Stewardship in Effective Churches, was actually published in the very early 1990s. There is nothing new about this thinking, but we have been remarkably, in my view, resistant to it. People do give in different ways for different reasons. I heard a great story recently from a young adult who doesn't matter her particular role in this congregation. She doesn't pledge, and she doesn't give consistently because she lives so close to the edge of her cash that she's very worried about making a commitment that she won't be able to keep. She feels very guilty about that. She feels like she's not a good enough Unitarian Universalist or a good enough adult because she can't pledge even though her congregation asks her to. And she's figured out that the one time in the year that she guaranteed will have extra money is tax refund season, because she lives her life in such a way that she knows that she will always get money back. So she takes great joy in giving money at that time of the year. And she gives as much as she can, as generously as she can. She feels all unarticulated. She feels like this is somehow second best, not good enough, not quite acceptable to the congregation that she loves. There are people in your congregations for whom that's true. So we need to be careful how we talk. But there are the spontaneous ways of giving, and Ken and Callahan says there are 7 or 8 different ways, including, I love this one, the unannounced, unplanned, urgent need thing that the minister didn't even tell anybody about and just announces on a Sunday and does a spontaneous special collection because it's an urgent and important need. Talk about heresy. But what he says is there are some people who really are moved to give that way, and if we don't ever ask them that way, we may not ever get that money. This is probably always been true, but it is definitely becoming more and more and more true that people give freely when they know not only that their gift will make a difference, but how it will make a difference. And this is what all of the research about millennials says. That's a challenge for us and the way we ask. And then this, which I can get kind of passionate about. We do tend to, we come from the Puritans tradition, or Protestant or whatever. There certainly are times when we need to economize, when we need to be more frugal, and we need to figure out how to do more with less. But I want to argue that that is not always the highest virtue that we can aim for. And sometimes invoking it means that we miss opportunities, that maybe we're right there. But we didn't even consider them because it was outside what we already knew we had. You do not have to agree with me on any of these, but this is my observation. I do hope, though, that you will agree with me that the ways we do stewardship really has to change to respond to the changing realities in our congregations. And I've said most of these, but let me just quickly go through a list of the way congregations are changing, and then I'll get your responses. We've talked about this. People attend irregularly because of social media and remote access. How many of you, let me do this in order, how many of you are members of congregations that live stream the service or part of it? Okay. How many of you are part of congregations, let the record show that no hands went up. How many of you are part of congregations where there's some sort of a podcast, there's some video record of at least part of the service that people can access at any time? Okay, all right. How many of you don't have that audio or audio-visual record, but have some kind of way that people can at least read the sermon? Okay. Those first two points of access for congregations are still pretty new in our tradition, but it is growing and rapidly changing. And what that means is that people can be someplace entirely different. I could be in Charleston, West Virginia, and I could listen and watch Jude preach, or the service at All Souls in DC, or Unity Church. There are more and more ways in which people can be connected to a particular congregation without ever physically showing up, which is a changing reality for sure. How many of you have Facebook pages, congregational Facebook pages? Most everybody does. You may not have access to it. One of the things that I'm amazed by is that I check, because I'm an administrator on the page, and I can see actually who the people are who have liked the congregation's page. It used to be 50%. I knew who 50% of them were. I now know maybe 25%. I don't know who 75 or 80% of the people who are connecting with the congregation that I'm serving are, or where they are. But they're somehow part of the congregation. That's a big change. Growing competition for charity dollars. Charity is the big category. People give to purpose, not institution. And we talked about that. And then there are dramatic generational differences in the ways that different generations are motivated to give. Let me go back. Questions? Disagreements? Yep.
I just wanted to ask, how do you plan appropriately for budget if you're always going to be sitting on tenterhooks, wondering if it's going to come in or not?
So I don't mean to be flip, but we, I believe, can budget for stewardship dollars in both pledging and non-pledging categories almost as accurately and maybe even as accurately as we can budget for the electric bill. Budgets are estimates. Budgets are our best estimates. And so for a new congregation, I would have no idea how to do that. But for a congregation that's established and has established patterns of giving, I believe that it's possible to build the budget based on what has happened in the past, on what your new member rate is, and that's why it's really helpful to have data from a number of years. Yeah. Yes?
It sounded like you were saying that it's okay to ask money several times during the year for different things.
Yes.
And we seem, in our congregation, we seem to fluctuate with people getting tired. Will people get tired of being asked all the time and maybe they won't give as much as opposed to giving one time really big? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the pledge model basically made a promise to our people, which was you will be asked once. The only significant request for a donation that you will get as a member of this congregation will happen at a predictable time in a predictable way, and you will not be harangued for money in any other way. And I'm not trying to dismiss that, because it matters enormously to people, that security that they've had, that they're only going to be asked once. I was actually at a very unpleasant congregational meeting once, where a longtime member of this congregation actually turned to a member of the board who were doing some exciting new things and said, shame on you for asking me for money other than my pledge. So, I mean, it's deeply held. And what I used to say was, but that particular person only has to give once. They're not in any way obligated to respond to any of the other appeals that are coming during the year. I know that that's not an adequate answer for some people. I equally know that there are people who either don't pledge or pledge a minimum amount, who are looking for those other opportunities and ways of knowing that their gift is going to make a difference. So the challenge for us is to figure out how to do it without so irritating people that they... And so the thing that I will say is, if you relieve yourselves of at least, of the anxiety and pressure of pledge season, it's actually easier to talk about money for the youth group's trip, or money for the new connection we have with the homeless day center, or it's easier to talk about that if we don't have this season in which we're only allowed to talk about money in one way. Yes. Hang on one second, sir.
In the past year, we were always on the annual pledge model.
Mm-hmm.
And over the summer, we realized the roof it was out of time. We had to do a big repair on the roof. And we've known for a long time we also have a boiler. And these facility items, big items, have always been part of the operating budget to build toward, but we never really got it done.
Uh-huh.
We had, so when the congregation came back in September, we had a special drive. It was amazingly successful. It was called Raise the Roof Drive.
Are you all here? I'm going to say this so it gets... Let me just put it on the recording just for a minute. That the urgent need, that your attempt had been to make sure the operating budget included maintenance, deferred maintenance, important maintenance jobs. It hadn't quite covered it. The roof wasn't giving you any more time, and you did a special drive.
But the latest chapter is we are now in the annual drive. And we were, in fact, going into it, because I was part of the planning, very enthusiastic. All of a sudden, we seem to have this tremendous generosity because there was a special purpose, but it has become quite apparent, both in the speed with which people have responded to the drive and the actual level of giving, that it does appear the special drive was considered, okay, this is really should have been part of the thing. I'm going to do part of my next one, and I'll make up for it at the drive. And the thing about the annual budget is it becomes very essential for planning, for locking into staffing expenses and everything else. So this is like really throwing us the switch of trying to do something slightly different. It's thrown us for quite a loop.
I mean, just because people give in different ways and there's money that maybe you weren't asking for doesn't mean that a dramatic shift isn't going to have effects, some of which you're going to be able to predict and some of which you aren't. That's very true. That's very true. What were you going to say?
Yeah, two things now. As far as the major problems and fundraising, we've been really lucky. There are a few people around who are, who write big checks when that happens, and we're lucky to have them. I don't know what'll happen when they disappear. But the other thing that seems to be recent, and I'd like a good answer. I have answers, but I don't have a good one. Is you go up to people and say, well, you pledged $1,000 this year. Where is it? So I pledged it. What more do you want? They're serious.
They haven't paid.
No. They're serious.
Oh my goodness.
I've got an answer, but I'd like a better one.
Well, so I don't know that this is a good answer. I do think that so much emphasis is put on asking people to make that pledge, to make that commitment, that it does seem as if it's over, it's done once you sign the piece of paper. I just discovered last week that one of the biggest pledgers in the congregation, in fact, has given nothing in the last 2 years. Now, I know something about that person and why that might be true, but that creates a horrible dynamic because you've got a bunch of people who are sort of aware that this individual is a major, has been, and that's the story, he had been a major contributor for a long time, isn't now, but he can't admit that to anybody. So it creates this. So what's your good answer?
I'd rather not.
Okay, he'd rather not say. Jude. Sorry, we'll try to collect those.
Can you talk a little bit about the linkages between stewardship and our concept of how membership works? I think about, we have 230 some odd members, but another 20 or 30 households or individuals that are pledging friends. Mm-hmm. And when in every way, all they have not done is sign a book to be a member, but they're attending regularly, they volunteer, they give money. What impact does that have on the bigger picture about how we think about funds and asking for money? And are they really different answers? Like, is a membership number that doesn't include pledging friends a real number?
So one of the things I've learned about working with congregations is that people can only remember a couple of numbers. And we make this really complicated. We make it really complicated by saying, well, we have this many members, and then we have that many friends, and X percentage of the members are pledging, and Y are not, and some of the friends are, and it gets murky and confusing. I am actually a big advocate for having a generic term that for me works as contributions. These are the people who contribute. And most congregations cannot answer this question quickly. How many households contributed to the congregation last year?
Meaning financially or
Yes,
in other ways?
financial contributions. How many households contributed financially last year?
127.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are those the pledgers?
Okay.
Did anyone who wasn't a pledger? What about that one-time person who wrote a check? What about the people who gave money, who put money consistently in the share of the plate? The treasurer is usually the only person who has access to that, and the treasurer frequently doesn't have any obligation to be writing the thank you notes or even necessarily reporting on that. So we've created this complexity within our giving systems which works against our own goals, I believe.
So we want to grow, but we also want to balance our budget.
Right.
The focus is get the minister to get the person to sign a book.
Get the minister to get the person to sign a book, which also, kind of like filling out the pledge form, is not the end of the story. And also we have our fair share system, which is, for most of us who don't live in the South, still based on the per head tax, dues, all of those things, which is a major incentive for congregations to depress their membership numbers, to have that budget line be as small as it can possibly be. That's a very real phenomenon. So how can we simplify it, is what I would say. How can we simplify it? Yes?
I was just going to say, we found we had a number of people who contributed in April and hadn't pledged, which means that they were counting on the tax refund. And we started counting that as a prepaid pledge for the following year, and they loved it. It really was gratifying to both them and to the congregation for budgeting purposes.
Okay, I'm enough of a radical to say that nothing should ever be held for another fiscal year. Money given is money given in the current year, but people get really mad at me about that. But we also create complexities in our accounting systems that require a lot of time and accuracy, because there's nothing that will upset people more than having their contribution miscounted or mistotaled. Yes, sir.
We have a kind of a little different situation in that all of our offerings each Sunday go to social action.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, and different social action organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only our pledges that support the actual business of the congregation.
What about non-pledge gifts that are actually identified as, and that might come in on a Tuesday?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's another complication. Let me ask you a question since you've said that. So all of the money that comes in the plate, in fact, goes out again. Does it show up in the budget as revenue?
No.
How many of you are familiar with the answer to this question in your congregation? How many of you have either a percentage that you give away or 100% of your plate that you give away? How many of you have that first? Many of us do. And how many of you, for how many of you does it actually get counted as revenue and then an expense, so it shows up on the budget? So some of you do, and some of you don't. Let me just finish this point, and then I'll get to your question. Why would it matter? Why would it matter if the money is just coming and going out? Why does it matter to have it show up on the budget, the monthly budget reports the board sees, and the?
It does allow you to see that people are giving.
Yes.
It's not visible. I have a line like Fifth Sunday line, and the various other line items where various ways in which people give money are identified. So when you look at the income,
you can see that people
see the giving that's going on.
Right. And I think it's also fair to add up all of the different kinds of contributions that people have made to different purposes, because all of that money has come out of the bank accounts and assets of the people in our congregations. And if they wanted to give that money directly to the shelter, they would. They're giving it through their congregation for a purpose. And if we're not counting it, it's not as visible or important. Sorry, yes.
Okay. In my congregation, we have like 4 plates, and every week there's another one.
Oh, so different weeks have different purposes.
Actually, 2 are for one thing, and then there's the 3rd and 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And people put the money in the plate, and then we add it up, and then it's treated as like a restricted fund.
Okay.
And it's
so,
sort of put at the bottom of the budget
Got
and
it.
then added separately.
So it's on the budget report, but it's not in the budget.
It's
So
not
at least it
considered
shows
part
up.
of the operating fund.
Right, right.
I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
Well, I would argue it's not as good as including it in the budget, but at least it's visible. At least people can see, if they're looking at the full financial report, what it was. See, this stuff is complicated, yes?
In our case, we have it as income. It's on the treasurer's report,
Uh-huh.
but it's not a budget item because it's not something that we budget for.
But could you? Have you done it for enough years to have an idea of how much money is likely to come in?
Oh, sure. The Social Justice Committee does a proxy allocation as part of the budgeting process, but we don't have it appear on the budget.
Okay, let me pick on you for one more second. If I were a fairly new person in your congregation, how would I know how that system worked or how it was reported?
Well, the treasurer's report is published on our website, and so
Okay.
you can see social justice as a fund line with income and allocation.
So I could find it out through the website. Treasurer's report on the website. That's good. Let me yes, and then we'll finish here.
Theory says that if you share the plate, you get increased income into the congregational coffers. What's your experience with that?
It's my experience is yes, that does happen. It is not consistently. It is not true in every single case, and it's not true in a way, or at least we don't have enough data to indicate how much. But it is the anecdotal information certainly does seem to indicate that it's another way of giving. That if a congregation decides to give away all or 50% or something of their plate, and especially if there's some mechanism by which congregation members are invited to participate in the decisions about where that money is going, there is it kind of loosens up the generosity vibes in the congregation. The concern that in good ways, the concern I think that it might take money away from the plate as a whole has not been borne out by experience, or even giving as a whole. It seems to have the opposite effect. Let me. You still all breathing? You're not too panicked. There's an article that I want you to make note of so that you can check it out yourself. The name of the article is "Churches Need a New Giving Model." The author is Stephen Dilla. The website is there. If you can't see it, I'll be happy to help you get it afterwards. One quote that really stands out and that frankly contradicts our understood wisdom. He asserts that nearly 85% of every dollar given in the United States has the potential to go to churches. I would say religious communities. We just have to learn how to ask for it. That's dramatically different from the received wisdom that people have, and his point is that people are giving for different reasons, and they're giving in directed ways, and so it's not being counted as giving to congregations because it's being used in different ways. I should tell you just his basic points here that he says are some of the reasons why it's not getting counted. Effectiveness is no longer assumed, and it's not enough to be good people who are working hard. I don't know whether you found that in your congregations, that we always talk about how hard the treasurer works and how hard the board members work, and that's really true, and we do our best job with the budget and we try. It's not that it's not true, it's not that it's not compelling, but it works against people's confidence and therefore willingness to give. So that's changed. And he goes on to say, if you don't have data to show somebody on what difference their giving made, the assumption is either you don't care or you have something to hide. This sounds pretty harsh, but I have certainly encountered that attitude in congregations that I've worked with. I am very aware of the time, so let me just go and I will hang around afterwards.
Can I just ask a question about that? I mean, it sounds all well and good, but how do you quantify something like, you know, how hard people are working or...
His point is we can't quantify that. And that is not a compelling reason. It's not an argument that works for people anymore in why they ought to give money, because the board members are working hard. Let me just do a couple more here. Over half of those born after 1979, in other words, millennials, agree when you ask them that the ability to see the impact of their donation has a significant bearing on whether they will give at all. This is, I don't know what significant translates to, but this is a big deal, because the way we've asked people to give money to our congregations, we tell them, well, we're supporting justice and RE and the minister's salaries and the utilities and the roof, etc., but not telling people, not being able to tell people in particular where their money's going. This is the real make treasurers hyperventilate point. The old model was a single budget, presented accurately at the congregational meeting, may be voted on. The details are essentially opaque to donors. He says the new model is going to involve multiple budgets, each funding a single ministry or event, and that a number of those will be in collaboration with other congregations and charities to accomplish outcomes that extend beyond the organization. You understand what he's saying here? Talk about complexity, but let's imagine there's an effective interfaith group in the city where you live that wants to get together to do a much better job on homelessness, on housing, on poverty than has been done before, and that now no one of those congregations has the capacity or the people to pull it off by themselves. So they ask for a partnership, create a partnership. What would it be like to, instead of just having a designation in the budget for that project, actually allow people to give money directly to that project, which was organizationally separate to some extent? He says the tradition in America is shifting from people who loved and trusted the church to people who question but are still curious. But it won't stay this way for long, he says. Either churches will adapt to the culture, gaining trust back despite modern skepticism, or congregations will be further marginalized. I'm sorry, I don't mean to end on a down note, but I don't think he's wrong about the urgency of these questions. And I think that what it depends on is our willingness to try things that are, in fact, new and different from the way we've done them before, and to think of this Congregations and Beyond challenge as meaning, how might we try not to overlook the financial resources that are not currently ones we already know about, and that may, in fact, be beyond our congregations themselves. But that is the big challenge. So thank you for your attention and your excitement, and I'm going to leave this up here if you want the website address. You can copy those. Thank you for being here.